Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me as we explore again the thin line between what sometimes can feel paranormal and what can also feel like it's more psychological. And nothing is really much of a better example than what we will actually be exploring. Before we begin, a brief disclaimer. This episode discusses a real historical case involving severe mental illness, neglect, religious rituals, self-harm behavior, and death. Some content may reference disturbing behavior and physical deformations. Those details are solely included for educational and clinical context, not for shock or entertainment value. This episode is not intended to diagnose, treat, or promote any belief system. It is an examination of documented events through a modern clinical lens. All right, so let's break this down. In comparing the real case of Annalise Michel to that of the fictional character of Emily Rose, starting with a time period and setting, the real case took place in Bavaria, West Germany, while the movie was focused on contemporary United States around the early 2000s. The identity of the girl in the real case was Annalise Michel, who's a 21-year-old German university student, while in the movie Emily Rose was 19 years old while attending college. In terms of onset of symptoms, Annalise began having epileptic seizures in her early teens, around 16. Then later they developed into auditory and visual hallucinations. Emily's portrayal of onset of symptoms started with a more of a supernatural occurrence where she woke up at 3 a.m. I think it's important to note that I think the movie took more of a paranormal lens in some ways than the actual real story did, which goes into the whole thing of the nature of the possession. R.E.A.L.M. definitely had more of a supernatural type feel to it as compared to the real like case, just in the way that some of the symptoms and everything were portrayed. However, there were a lot of similarities in that both the real case and in the movie, there was the portrayal of her being possessed by various different demons. One of the major key differences in this was just kind of the duration of everything that happened as long formal exorcism, while in real life it was 67 exorcisms, which I'll explain more further down the video. The story tragically concludes the same in that both of them die from malnutrition and dehydration. As it relates to accountability, where there was one of the biggest differences between what happened in real life and what happened in the movie. In the movie, only one person was really sent to trial and was formally charged, with the case of Father Richard Moore. In real life, there was 4 individuals charged, which was both of the parents, the priest, and the bishop. All right, to get to the more nitty-gritty of the details of what actually happened in the real life case. Again, some of this will be a little bit more graphic. The first thing to kind of note is that the condition for Annalise actually continued to worsen even after 5 years of medical therapy, which is part of the reason why they kind of decided to try something else. And another thing that I thought was very interesting was that they actually consulted for an exorcism first, and the church initially refused because they did not believe that she met criteria for demonic possession. As kind of mentioned, it wasn't one time that they had exorcism once it was approved. It was 67 times, generally 1 or 2 per week, lasting each up to 4 hours. During the exorcisms, there was a lot of things that would feel very shocking. She talked about having certain personas in her and some of the recordings, which there are for some of the exorcisms that they did. She mentions being inhabited by demons such as Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Nero, Hitler, and another disgraced priest who essentially possessed her at first. Other things that ended up happening is that she exhibited violent behavior, such as tearing off her clothes, barking like a dog for days, beating and biting family members, eating insect spiders, and some of it I think was actually kind of shown in the movie. I think I even read something about her even like taking off the head of a bird, which is again very disturbing. At the end of it all, again, it was basically deemed that she ended up passing away due to extreme malnutrition, dehydration, essentially starvation, after nearly 10 months of relentless exorcisms and neglect to medical care. Here is a picture of what she looked like at the end, and just so that you can see the profound effects that it had. This actually, this was very tragic for a lot of different reasons. The physical strain that it took on her, the lack of sleep, exhaustion, dehydration. At the end of it all, she was 68 pounds and suffered from pneumonia as well as other things. Certain experts kind of believe that her condition was a spiritual sickness and a heavy psychiatric disturbance. In other words, a profound mental crisis shaped by her beliefs. So the recordings were meant to bolster a claim beyond a medical disorder at work, allegedly kind of disclaiming inhumane voices, but keeping in mind that a lot of this also happened very close to the time that the film The Exorcism had been released in Germany, which was in 1973, which was very popular, which are questions that I might have had on Annalise's own behavior. The exorcism started in 1975, just for reference. As an aftermath of the consequences due to severe just mess that happened with all of this, the church decided that, at least in Germany, exorcism rite would require the presence of a medical doctor to monitor the person's health. When we look at the initial possession, it seems that the movie definitely shaped it more into a paranormal perspective. So in the movie, she woke up at 3 a.m. smelling something burning. This is something in kind of lore considered as typical when somebody is dealing with anything related to demonic, because again, 3 a.m. is considered the unholy hour, since it is a mock of the miracle hour, which is 3 p.m. And it also mocks the Holy Trinity. This is also, I think, kind of explained in the movie. Other possible explanations could really kind of include anything from the onset of schizophrenia, sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations. First episode happened alone. It's really kind of hard to tell what happened and what didn't happen. You know, it's different if two people that don't have any kind of religious context both wake up smelling just something burning, or both see things moving across the room as kind of it was displayed in the movie. However, with sleep paralysis and other things like that, you can have all those feelings, all those visions. So the movie talked a lot about the temporal lobe focus. This is the part of the brain that helps with memory, fear, emotion, circuitry, language processing, sensory imagery. So it can kind of include that intense fear, that deja vu, odd smells and taste, alter reality feeling, and sometimes, yeah, religious theme experiences. Doesn't mean the religion's causing it, because the brain networks often overlap with those meanings and emotions. So as it relates to the seizures, can they happen when somebody's conscious? And it just kind of depends, you know? That's the thing. Focal impairment awareness, sometimes it can be altered, sometimes it can be partial memory, sometimes it can just happen depending on various things. So another thing that was discussed in the courtroom was psychotic epileptic disorder. So one study kind of shows that there are cases where people who suffer from temporal lobe epilepsy do have some hallucinations. It's not every patient, but it is a possibility. So in some sense, yes, psychosis can occur with epilepsy. All right, so what about synaglossy? So synaglossy is when a person appears to speak or understand languages that they never heard, right? So an important distinction is that the claims do exist, proof of it does not. It is extremely rare. Fewer than 100 cases really worldwide have ever really been reported, and only a handful have ever been discussed in serious academic or parapsychology literature. Several have been independently verified to modern scientific standards. So why does this not necessarily hold up clinically? So the few things of it is that normally when looked into it more closely, a few things are found. One is that the person was often exposed to the language earlier in life. They knew some of it, but had kind of forgotten it. Language is also very limited in terms of use, so no fluency, so they may just repeat one or two lines. It can also be misidentification. Sometimes, people, as they say, hear what they want to hear. In this particular case, at least in the real case, no linguistic ever confirmed genuine fluency. So that is something to keep in mind. The claim related to the black pupils. So with seizures, auditory visual hallucinations, paranoia, it is actually possible for a person's pupils to dilate to where they look black. And usually just has to do with pupil dilation and lighting or medication effects. The other claim, the thing about strange body posture, this can look very extreme at times, rigid postures. This can fall within the realm of schizophrenia. Catatonia is what it's called. So that's freezing in rigid postures or extreme repetitions of an action like genuflection, meaning that they basically just freeze in certain type of form. So at least from a modern perspective, both from the movie and real case inspiration, it looks like it could be a combination of temporal lobe epilepsy and other seizure disorders, comorbidity with psychosis, mood disturbance, sleep disturbance, starvation escalate some of these symptoms. Things to also consider: schizophrenia typically manifests actually in late adolescence, so early childhood, and Annalise was 16 to 23, which is prime age for onset. Another possibility is dissociation disorders. During the exorcism, she displayed what could be considered as like a different personality, saying that she had different demons inside of her, described having Lucifer versus Hitler versus Judas. It could be a possession form of dissociation identity disorder. Another thing that is very important to kind of point out is some of the religious trauma, and this is again referencing to the real case. Anais actually grew up in an environment that was very devout, very strict. It is documented that her family rejected many modern forms of even Catholicism and kept a conservative, fear-based religiosity. As a teen, she felt burdened by her sins, and she would do penances such as sleeping on a cold stone floor to atone for her sins. So that just goes again to show the level of how devout they were, or the potential extremities of their religious beliefs. Modern psychiatry evaluations of the case uniformly concludes that Annalise was not possessed and was a victim of misdiagnosis and medical condition and basically neglect. And one of the things is when the doctor who was attending, talked about the whole thing of crazy people don't know that they're crazy, right? Well, let's put a little asterisk to that. And that's because psychosis can be episodic. Yeah. So normally people experience more psychotic breaks. Even epileptics can be, again, episodic. So people sometimes can look normal in between. Levels of that vary from person to person. All right. So what do we have? We have medication claims. So basically, well, overall perspective, they claim that they suffered from epilepsy, psychosis, and Faith claimed that they suffered from something beyond pathology, something meaningful exceeded medical expectations. So, from the point of view of what we're trying to create here, is that neither fully explains the whole person. Medicine invalidated in a lot of ways kind of the feelings of what she wanted and what her family wanted, which essentially led her to stop and seek religious treatment. Religion ignored some of the physical demands of the body, and both were just very keen on one is right over the other instead of working together. And that's what this whole thing is about. It's about violating people's feelings because feelings can matter. If in some ways there could have been a happy middle ground, who knows if the story would have been different. But I think that the film and everything I showed, shows also just how thin of a line all of this can be. Even though I did provide what is considered, clinical explanations for some of this, and I wasn't there. right? I don't know exactly how much of it just really line up. I mean, based on the documents, based on what I've seen, yeah, it does seem to be more clinically explained. However, within the way that the movie portrayed it, right, a lot of the things did seem very supernatural. And then the other thing as well, just to keep in mind as well, is that sleep deprivation and starvation increases symptoms, and this can just make a person feel worse. So there really isn't a happy conclusion here because somebody died, and there leaves a lot of what ifs could have happened. But the point of all of this is to try to both treat the person where they're at. If you experience something and it feels real, that that means something. Does that mean that we should ignore all types of medicine and every other symptoms? No. So that's pretty much my thoughts on this. Please let me know what you think. I think it's very interesting, but it's a lot of information. This is actually a very condensed version of everything that I found. There's things that you agree with, things that you don't disagree with. I'd love to hear your opinion. If there's any other movies that you would like to try to see me try to break down or review, please also leave that in the comments. And then lastly, very soon we will be starting, me and a panel of 4 other people will listen to real life stories, not just movies, and we will provide our perspective on them just so that, we can hear things from different sides to be able to provide support to each other because that's part of what the community does. So ultimately, at the end, what happens, what's real, what's not real, that's for you to decide. I just try to point out things from, again, right, from the clinical perspective. And thanks for being here.